All right, everybody. Welcome back to Hardpoints, the podcast about energy security and the startup economy and how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neal, how are things going for you, man?
Yeah, good. I feel like I say this every week, but I'm exhausted. Last week was New York Climate Week, and I came home kind of like ready to just lie flat for the following week. I, of course, can't do that, but it was busy. It was great. So many great connections, but wore me out. How about you?
Yeah, I'm a little disorganized this morning. So we're going on a family vacation for 3 days, a wedding tomorrow. But as part of that, I ended up putting my father-in-law on a train this morning, and then I had to deal with my son getting ready slowly this morning. So it's been nonstop, since I woke up, of managing my son, make sure he's getting dressed, get out the door in time in order to pick up my father-in-law, drive him down to Union Station, get onto the train, make sure he's onto the train. He's kind of a puttering fella, so it was a little bit of sit here, Cliff, give me your coat, I'm going to put it up here, all everybody in the thing. And then running, to get to the car in order to drive here to get in time to be for the recording. So it's already been a morning. I might need a drink at 8.
Yeah, get some more coffee, man. That sounds terrible.
No, it's fine. It's it's just the phase of life you're in as a father. Your parents are starting to get a little bit older. Your kids just need a little bit more help. It's just the phase of life. So I'm sure I'll miss it 20 years from now. But right now, like I said, maybe a little whiskey before breakfast is kind of where I'm thinking.
Take the edge off, man. Yeah, do what you got to do.
I'm joking, of course. So, yeah. Today we are joined by those that are watching on the video. You've already seen it. An old connection of mine, a guy named Alexander McCoy. He's a veterans advocate, a campaign leader. He works on social, economic, and climate. He's not a former U.S. Marine because, of course, every Marine in the known universe would say once a Marine, always Marine.
Hoorah.
But yut. Anyways, Alex serves as the senior advisor for climate campaigns at Public Citizen, where he develops and drives policy initiatives connecting energy, labor, and national security. What's also really cool is he's the co-founder of Common Defense, the nation's largest progressive veterans organization. I've worked with Common Defense. I've worked with Alex before when I was doing my BFRL stuff. And he works closely with the Veterans Power Americans to empower veterans in the clean energy transition and public service. Got a lot of deep experience in grassroots mobilization, legislative strategy, coalition building. And I personally think Alex is a real leading voice for veteran engagement in a lot of ways. One of them being public policy, another around workforce development, and of course, near and dear to my heart is climate. Alex, thanks for joining us on the Hardpoints pod.
Thanks for the kind intro. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So I think now I'm properly outnumbered here by you jarheads. So this is kind of where we're at.
The way we like it.
Aren't you guys supposed to be the few, the proud, instead of an overwhelming majority here?
It's about concentration of force.
There you go.
Yeah, so we got that going for you. We'll see about how that all goes. Alex, I want to kind of get started talking to you about your work in climate and about the specific work that you're doing now around some of the historical work of climate around the oil companies.
Yeah, thanks. So I work at Public Citizen, which is a consumer advocacy group that works to hold big corporations accountable, as well as government officials, whoever is screwing over the little guy, right? And my team is looking specifically at the actions of big oil and gas companies. So I want to just throw a little fact at you. When do you think big oil companies knew that climate change was happening and it was real and it was caused by their products? You want to spit out a year? Take a guess.
I think I know the answer. I'll let Neal go first, just so I can look smart.
You know the answer. You should say it. I actually have no idea. I'm guessing it's the 60s or something like that.
Yeah, I thought it was 1967 or something like that.
Yeah, so this is from 1965 in a publication by the American Petroleum Institute, which is the trade group of companies. And they said that the Most important predictions of this report is that carbon dioxide is being added to the Earth's atmosphere by the burning of coal, oil, and natural gas at such a rate that by the year 2000, the heat balance will be so modified as possibly to cause marked changes in climate beyond local or even national efforts. It's 1965.
Yeah,
And so,
it's more than a few years ago.
yeah.
So like what is that, 60 years ago? A little
That was
math in
3 or
public real
4
quick.
years ago, I thought.
Yeah,
No,
3.
that's
Yeah, come on, old man.
Yeah, so that's basically what I focus on, right? Is what did these companies know, and then what did they do, right? Instead of transitioning to a sustainable business model, instead of reducing the pollution that was going to cause impacts that they themselves realized were going to be catastrophic, they could have invested in renewable industries, in solar, in wind, even in nuclear, but they didn't. Instead, they did a campaign of misinformation to deny what they internally and their scientists knew to be fact, and that they were also integrating into their own business models. So one of the fun facts that I recently learned is they model sea level rise into the design of their offshore oil rigs. So they assume that there's going to be this sea level rise and they need to build their offshore oil rigs higher so that over the lifespan of that rig, it's not going to get overwhelmed by the rising sea. So this is the kind of thing that you would not do if you thought this was all a hoax.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think anybody that has even the slightest inkling of a scientific mind knows that this isn't really a hoax. And I mean, go back further. I did a presentation the other day about the origins of climate science, and Eunice Newton Foote first published this in 1856. So it's been around for a while. Maybe not internalized in corporate documents, but like if you go back to the middle part of the 19th century for the initial kind of publication associated with this, Svante Arrhenius did it. He ended up winning a Nobel Prize for a different thing, but like that kind of a brain did it himself in 1896, 19th century sort of science. Like anybody that's like a serious person is willing to acknowledge that climate is affected by carbon dioxide, and if you burn a lot of stuff, you're going to have a lot of carbon dioxide put in the atmosphere. So, I guess the question is so what? Like it's been 60 years. Like the oil companies have been building taller oil rigs, but like nobody seems to really be doing much with that. Like, why should anybody care that they knew about it and they didn't do the right thing?
Yeah, well, the basic reason is we think that the actions that these companies took broke the law, and that law enforcement officials like district attorneys, attorneys general, ideally the Department of Justice and the federal government should be conducting investigations to see who knew what and then decided what, and applying the law as written, which says that taking some of these actions to deceive the public, to falsely advertise, to cause disasters like extreme heat and increased severe storms. I'll give you one more quote from this is the year after I was born. So not 1989. This was a Shell memo in 1989 saying that civilization could prove a fragile thing. They're saying this about their own company's operations, and that their company's operations would cause, quote, more violent weather, more storms, more droughts, more deluges. Agricultural patterns would be dramatically changed. Like just basic common sense. If a company causes a disaster that objectively destroys property, takes innocent lives, that's a crime. And what we're doing is trying to get our officials to hold these companies accountable. And I'll give you one example of how this has happened in the past. So big tobacco companies did this same kind of thing. They deceived the public. They tried to deny the link between their company's products and cancer. And they did it using some of the exact same tactics, the exact same people in a lot of different instances. And they were investigated by the Department of Justice.
Yeah. Go ahead, Neal.
So I'm going to complicate this narrative a little bit, I think. I'll ask you a question, which is how much of the world's oil supply is controlled by your targets? First of all, let's name your targets. Who are the companies that are responsible as you see it?
Yeah. Well, I would flip that and I would look specifically at the jurisdictions, right? In each jurisdiction, there's the local impacts and there's the local actors. So what we're looking at is not this big picture, pie in the sky. We're trying to prosecute the global energy system. We're looking at there was, John Doe, who in one case that I'm looking into, they put together false uh, information packets and sent them to the public school teachers in all the schools in a particular jurisdiction to try to get them to teach what they themselves knew was fraudulent information. And so that's where we're focused, right? Like we're not trying to say, okay, well, there's the different countries that have state-owned oil companies and there's all these different companies, how big, how small. We're looking at the concrete actions of individuals who can be held accountable, and in some cases those individuals are the corporate executives of particular companies, or like I mentioned, the trade groups where they collaborated.
That confuses me because the energy markets are global, and if you prosecute an executive in Houston, there's oil and gas and energy available in other places. So how does that fix anything?
Well, I think that these companies need to be honest about what their products are doing. There is an ongoing effort by these companies in collaboration with each other.
I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. And by the way, I'll say this, like I'm on the team that says we got to fix climate change. I think my view is a little different in that I think there's also a reality that energy is our prosperity and our security. And if you and both of these things can be true at the same time. I don't think this is exclusive per se. But my stat is that 85% of the world's oil is owned by state-owned oil companies. It's a small part of the global oil supply that's owned by Shell, Chevron, Exxon, BP, the folks that I would call the good guys. And I know those aren't good. But look, I get it. I think I say it that way provocatively because I see this first as a national security question. And like, I'll lay it out there and you can push back. But our prosperity and our military power comes from our ability to produce and use energy. And right now, the most dense form of energy, the most widely available energy is oil and gas. As much harm as it does, it is definitely causing climate change. All of that is 100% true, and I'm working my ass off to address that. It's also true at the same time that that's what's readily available, and that is what is powering our prosperity and our security.
So one of the things. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things
I'll finish that point, which is like it's doing that, and then if you couple that with if we just decide to get off that train, China, Nigeria, Venezuela, Russia, Saudi Arabia, who are not our friends, own the world's oil supply, and then that is their source of prosperity and security.
So I did a quick Chat GPT search about what percentage of liability you have to have in order to be considered responsible. And according to Chat GPT, which is the world's cheapest and most frequently wrong lawyer.
Yeah. Next to the Lance Corporal in the barracks. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. For negligence cases, a party is legally responsible if, quote, they owed a duty of care, they breached that duty. That breach was a proximate cause of harm and damages resulted. Even if their contribution to harm is small, it is a substantial factor in causing the injury. They can be held liable. There is no minimum percentage threshold. Causation and foreseeability are what matter, according to, ChatGPT Esquire. So, I mean, there's at least, it seems to be legal standing for this, even if you could argue that, like, the, there was a national security implication associated with that. I think we could have that discussion about, like, hey, this was important for American hegemony to a certain extent, and our ability in order to project power around the world. But I also don't think that, like, that excuses intentionally harmful behavior by the oil companies too, right? Like, both, again, to your point, Neal, both things can be true. Alex, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think this is really the meat of the conversation, and I take the points that Neal made in, like, good faith, because a lot of people are thinking about this. So let me lay out the way I think about it. So number one, we are addicted to these products. I totally agree, right? Like, our institutions, our infrastructure is using them right now. If we just turned off that switch tomorrow, that would not be responsible. So what we need to be doing, and what we have now missed an opportunity for decades to do, is wean ourselves off that in a responsible and an intentional way. And that's the kind of policy that we were seeing with the Inflation Reduction Act that the previous presidential administration and Congress passed, and that this new administration has now mostly repealed, where we had the opportunity to create incentives to make it easier and cheaper for consumers to switch to products that were going to be better for themselves and better for their pocketbook and their household budget, and better for the country and better for the world.
One of the things I talk about sometimes, as far as from a climate, like, if we had taken an off ramp earlier, in 2000, if we had started addressing climate change, obviously Al Gore, the 2000 election, like, he wrote about Earth in the Balance back in the 90s. If we had started addressing climate change then, it would have been a 2% per year decrease that we had to do in order to kind of hit our glide slope. And now we're close to like 8-9%. Like, we've gone from, like, skiing bunny hills to black diamonds. And we're pretty close to having facing a cliff. So there is a time component to this. And I would like to think that, like, if we had started a little earlier, if people hadn't been kind of hiding or causing doubt in the mind of people that aren't particularly scientifically literate, that we might have been able to move a little bit faster. Is there any evidence to that, Alex?
Absolutely. And we saw in those kinds of corporate planning memos that I referenced from decades ago that they were looking at that, that crossroads, that they would have had to transition their business model because there was a general understanding among the public that the scientific consensus was that we needed to wean ourselves off of these types of fuels. The other thing I'd say here is, America is a country that I believe can lead the way. And we have a lot of innovators that have dramatically reduced the cost of things like batteries, that have dramatically improved the technologies that are going to be able to replace these legacy fuel types. We've seen some really interesting stuff going on where, for example, the technology that was previously used and currently used for fracking to get natural gas out of the ground is now being experimented with to get geothermal energy, which is clean and renewable. So there's a lot of potential here for America to be a dominant leader in technological development, innovation, in piloting these things to enable other countries to then.
Our ass kicked.
And we're getting our ass kicked because we're not investing in these techs of the future. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, look at what China is far outpacing us in wind, solar, battery
EVs
development. Partially because they have to. Well, partially because they don't have a bunch of their own oil supply. But let me sort of fact check you on one thing. I think, and it's not a fact check. That's probably too strong. But if you look at what the IRA repeal was, it crushed wind and solar, but basically everything else stayed. So I don't think it's fair to say that the IRA was fully repealed. I think that is what the Republicans wanted to say happened because politically that was expedient for them. But the reality is geothermal is still funded, batteries are still funded, nuclear is still funded. It's sort of ironic, but they didn't actually decimate it as much as they are saying.
As we feared. Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm in the wind space. Like it was every bit as bad as as it was advertised to be for wind and solar. That said, those projects are still getting built because they've reached a point where they're profitable without the subsidies and et cetera. Anyway, I just want to make sure that we don't in this world, sometimes we do a bit too much beating ourselves over the head because we've also, while we are getting our asses kicked, we've also made a lot of progress. Like if you look at the emissions reductions we've accomplished, pretty great. But also if you looked at a graph of how much, we've replaced of fossil fuel generation, it's basically zero. We're adding renewables at the pace that electricity demand is growing, and therefore we're still burning just about as much in the generation space. We're burning just as much fossil fuel as we did 20 years.
Yeah, I totally. That's absolutely right, and it shows how much further we have to go because we have all of these new energy demands. The more we electrify the appliances we use, our homes, our cars, our transit systems, that requires more electricity generation. And so we need to not just be building more, but outpacing the growth of the demand that we have. And we're not going fast enough to do that. Totally agree.
Yeah. And the thing I would say here is that those successes that we're having are not because of the actions of the oil companies that have shown this kind of history of I mean, let's just call it fraud because that's what it is. It's in spite of them, right? They were some of the biggest supporters of handicapping wind and solar's continued expansion in the IRA. So, there is not only a history but an ongoing track record associated with this. Chris Wright, the current Secretary of Energy, is starting to not even allow you to say the phrase climate change in any sort of government documents, even though in his own, I think it was Liberty Energy was his company, he talks about climate change in his own documents. So it's there's just kind of a pattern here. But moving from kind of the culpability side of it, Alex, to more the damages, let's talk about so if you got this thing where you say, okay, you fraudulently did this thing, but it's not just I lied or I hid this or I did this campaign. It also has to have an outcome of damage to it. So, maybe you can talk to me a little bit about how do you demonstrate damage and the kind of the causality associated with that?
Yeah. So if you look at, there's a couple different ways to approach this, which is part of what my team investigates. But if you're looking specifically at the harms caused, right? I've been reading through a local county's medical examiner reports, reading all of the cases of people who died due to heat, according to the medical examiner. And you've got situations where this county, the number of days that have been over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer has gone higher and higher and higher every year. And now we're at this point where you've got, fit young kids. I was recently reading about, there was an Army veteran who was an experienced hiker, went out to do a short hike, had water, had all the appropriate attire, everything, had his little backpack, and he just died. It was not what used to happen, and it's not what ought to happen. And you have these cases where people have lost their lives, and had a reasonable expectation that the environment that they were in, should remain healthy. We see the property damage. I live in Florida, right? I just bought a house earlier this year down in Florida, and it was a huge pain in the butt to get insurance. A lot of, USAA, Navy Fed, none of my usual banks do home insurance in this state at all. And we have a insurer of last resort here in Florida that's run by the state government because it is just not profitable for insurance companies. And you can easily, as these sorts of impacts grow and grow and grow, and it's the frog in the pot getting slowly boiled. And then eventually the economic systems that we depend upon start cascading. And that's scary. People have a right to live, and, to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And the people who are harming that, they need to at least pay for those externalities.
To me, that's the thing that I think kind of resonates most clearly, right? Because if you're talking about the kid that goes hiking on a hot day, I think you get confused. It's is that really climate's fault? Where were his parents? You get stuck in kind of this sort of stuff, right? But insurance markets don't lie. What do you have any sense of what you pay for insurance, Alex?
For my home,
yeah,
I'll just say it's more expensive than my friends and my parents in other states pay. That's for sure.
I'm looking at a report right here. Florida property insurance premiums have surged about 34% in the last 3 years. So if you're spending, let's say $4,000 on home insurance this year, 3 years ago you were spending $3,000. The oil companies made a profit off of what's costing you now $1,000 more a year, to a certain extent. That, there is culpability associated with that in my mind. I would be pissed if in that particular case, if they knew that they were doing something that was going to be causing damage to others and there wasn't at least some responsibility for that.
There's another team at Public Citizen that works on insurance issues as well, and holding those insurance companies accountable too, because sometimes they'll just straight up pull out of an area without warning, and now you've got no insurance.
I don't know if I blame the insurance companies. I think that's a sound business decision, but they.
We've talked about this on this podcast a few times. Actually, is if you want to see what's really happening in a place, go look at what the insurance companies are doing. They don't take risk. They know what the numbers are. They know what the probabilities are. They're not in Vegas betting on whether they're going to make money or not. They know they're going to make money when they issue a policy, which is why the banks that you said you're the normal banks aren't issuing policies anymore. I struggle a little bit though with holding a specific oil company to account. And Mike, I'm not sure. You said it was fraud. I think that, if they knew something, they should say it. I'm totally on board with that. The reality here that, one, I'll start with a premise that, it's a bias that I have, but oil and gas has, for all it's bad, has been one of the primary drivers of pulling basically, I don't know, millions of people, billions of people out of poverty. Energy is the source. I'll say it again. Energy is our prosperity. It powers everything we do. And there are economic forces here that drive economies, not just a specific company, but the entire economy to prosperity. That's political forces. It's certainly these companies, but they're part of a bigger picture. And I'll just finish with this point, which is as much as I care about the climate and the environment, the way to get change, in my mind, what I'm working on at my company, Mike, I know you're doing the same thing, is you got to build something better, faster, cheaper. EVs are going to win because they're a better product. EVs aren't going to win because they're cleaner. They're better. They're simpler. They last longer. People love them because you put the gas down and it's like gas. You put the pedal down and it goes fast. The thing I'm building is cheaper energy that's flexible, fast, all of that. I mean, it's win on the product. Yes, let's deal with the externalities, but the accounting of those externalities, I don't think you can pin on one company at a time.
I guess what I would go to, Neal, here is that do you think there's no legal responsibility for lying to the public?
No, I think if you lie to the public, that's effed. I don't know the law. I'm not a lawyer.
So again,
But
the chat GPT Esquire
let
here.
ChatGPT solve this.
So
you're burning a bunch of trees here by talking to ChatGPT.
So it says fraud usually requires false representation of a material fact. Second is knowledge of falsity that the person knew was untrue or misleading. 3, intent to deceive. The purpose was to trick someone. 4 was reliance. The victim reasonably relied on the misrepresentation. And 5, damages. The victim suffered harm as a result. So if that's kind of the definition of fraud.
Yeah, those fuckers shouldn't be lying. No argument. I mean,
okay,
of course
so we got that, right?
Of course not. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like they are a part of a bigger system. The bigger system is the world wants to pull people out of poverty. People want to live in houses. Houses get built with wood that's cut by saws that are powered by oil and gas. It's just a big system. They're a piece of a bigger puzzle.
I guess where I go with this is like, do we have to be too categorical about it? Like there was no possible way this could have been better before. Like if the oil companies like knew that they had a legal responsibility to it because they were causing damages, and it's definitional fraud in my opinion.
Like a counterfactual could be if they had been honest, the public would be more in favor of making a transition.
Yeah.
Totally. Yes.
I mean, so one of the things I go back to, ignore Al Gore, the 2008 election, the 3 major candidates for office in that time, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama on the Democratic side, and John McCain on the Republican side after he had won, all of them were in favor of a national carbon market. Like they had publicly gone on record. Newt Gingrich, there was a thing, I can't remember, there was like an ad. He sat down with Nancy Pelosi and they said, let's fix climate. So yes, there's a lot of people that are politicizing it and like they have some hay to make there. But, like when I look at the underlying money in the system there, like I know my very strong, I wouldn't even call it a suspicious, my belief of why that changed is because oil companies and oil executives funded people to do something differently. And it poisoned our politics and it's kind of poisoned our future. And we are now 20 years later, 18 years, even after that election, still not doing a damn thing on climate from a federal level.
Totally agree. I'm sure they hired lobbyists to do that. That's bad. I also think it's Karl Rove or people like Karl Rove. Alex might be too young for Karl Rove, but do you know Karl is?
I know who Karl Rove is. Yeah.
Right, so like Turd Blossom.
Yeah,
I was an anti-Iraq war protesting teen in high school. No,
Turd Blossom was the nickname that George W. Bush gave to him. He had like nicknames for everybody, and he said like he called him Turd Blossom.
I love that nickname.
Yeah,
I don't know that I ever heard it before.
I guess it's like some Texas like cattleman shit where like there's like flowers occasionally that grow out of like cow crap, and so he said that like the Karl Rove was like like waited around and dealt with shit, and out of it came the flower of the George W. Bush administration.
Holy shit, that's awesome.
So yeah, old Turd Blossom there.
Turd Blossom. Well, Turd Blossom, or I don't know if he did this one too, but he certainly did things like this. I mean, their objective is to create wedge issues. They did it with abortion, which I call a fake issue. We can talk about that sometime too. Like, I just think this is another one of those things where they found a line that could work and they created a whole big lie about it, and people bought into it. And there was, I'm sure, as I say, like I'm sure the oil companies did that too. No argument.
Yeah. And what I would throw out here, right? Like what you're describing, Neal, is the importance of energy, right? I would say it's energy that powers our prosperity. And we can get energy from oil and gas, but it's not a fair playing field right now, and it never has been. You have all kinds of ways that oil and gas is subsidized by taxpayer dollars. You have all kinds of ways that these incumbent large corporations have engaged in anti-competitive behavior to suppress and choke off clean, cheap, renewable energy. And on a level playing field, these new energies of the future outcompete fossil fuels. They do. They are genuinely better for our cost of living. They're better for our communities. They're better for our air. They're better for reducing pollution. They're better for our domestic industry. They're just better. And you've got these old legacy investments that they don't want to write off, and so they're engaged in this zombie, let's keep the coal plants active.
I almost agree with most of, like 60% of what you said. I 100% agree with.
Then it's a good conversation. That's what it means.
What is this? Is this the Anchorman here, where it's 60% of the time, it works 100% of the time?
So let me say this. Look, what you just said, energy is our prosperity. I don't say oil and gas is our prosperity. Energy is our prosperity and our security. That's in my pitch deck. It's sort of the central part of where I spend my day.
We used to get it from whale oil. You want to bring that back?
No. But look, I live in this world of making the argument that what I'm building is better, faster, cheaper. I will also acknowledge that every energy market is a little bit different, and so flipping the switch. And I don't think you're advocating for this, like you said a couple of minutes ago, that you flip the switch. Things don't work that way. I think clearly we can move away from certain things faster than others. But when I say every energy market is a little different, look at, I don't know, let's say Japan, for example. They don't have a great solar resource. They don't really have geothermal that they can access. They don't want to do nuclear for maybe obvious reasons. Got scarred. Yeah, obvious reasons, right? So they have a few like fewer options than we have in West Texas. In West Texas, we've got basically all the options, which is part of why it's such a great energy state. I do think that in most cases you can add wind and solar to the mix, and not in most cases. In every case that I've ever looked at, you add wind and solar to the mix, prices come down. But it's not it's not the solution. It's not like you can say wind and solar everywhere, because like if you want to talk about solar in Alaska, it's great half the year and awful half the year. So and in Alaska too, where there's like where they have a pretty decent solar resource because they don't have cloud coverage all the time, most of those places don't have great wind. So now, so that you don't have those two, but you might have geothermal. Hopefully you do. There's not the same opposition to nuclear, but what I'm saying is that there's no one size fits all, which is also part of what makes this transition hard, is that every community, every county, every state has to sort of figure this out. The private sector has to present the options, and bring better technology to the table that are options that then can be applied, and then only then do we have this off ramp where we can start turning down the dial. But this is again part of I would just say a much more complicated picture than.
I mean, I would agree with that, Neal. But where do you think some of the best engineers in the world work?
With me.
Clearly, clearly, and then the guy you're talking to on this podcast. Anyways.
I'd say in the United States military, and that's why we need more veterans to get into the energy industry.
I've worked with at its core, oil companies are massive engineering operations, and unlike Boeing or some of these others that have kind of sold out their engineering capacity for short-term gain, oil companies retain incredible engineering talent. Actually, they're needed for our energy transition. They need to have these people working on the shit that's going to make our future. And so, my argument to you, Neal, would be you're talking about the private sector. The oil companies are the private sector. They are the engineering talent that could have done a lot on this. Geothermal is something that they probably could have unlocked decades ago with the talent and the materials and the engineering that they have, and they chose not to. So, for me, it's again, I don't want to get
lost.
Yeah,
right, at their own loss. I put that in the category of Kodak and Xerox, though. Oxy is an oil and gas company that's trying to do more innovative stuff, but they struggle, man. Look at Shell. A couple of years ago, they created Shell New Energies. They invested $1 billion a year in energies of the future. They're trying, but big corporations like that suck at innovation, to be honest. They're trying to get better. They had a mandate, Shell did, to to shift off of fossils. And then they took a bottom line hit. Their shareholders complained. They got sued. They lost that. And then like they're basically back on a trajectory of like refocusing on profit. So like I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying this is complicated. And for them, one, they lack the skill to innovate, or the even if they wanted to, I'm not sure they'd be very good at it. And two, they have this underlying like, well, their fiduciary responsibility is to the people who own stock in the company, and like that's illegal too.
Sure, but
So
how do you hit that?
Lying? No, they shouldn't be lying. But they're like, this is not an easy equation for them.
I guess so. How do you hit that bottom line then? Like you hit that bottom line with like criminal responsibility for fraud. Like I mean, like if they have this fiduciary responsibility, like from a governance perspective, if they have this fiduciary responsibility to just maximizing shareholder value, one of the fastest ways that you can decrease shareholder value is to be engaged with a lawsuit associated with fraud, which is what they did.
And so, the big tobacco companies, do they have a fiduciary responsibility to cast doubt on the science linking smoking to cancer?
I discount that comparison because cigarettes were a recreational thing. It was obviously bad, and the people that lied about it shouldn't be lying about it. And also, there's no like societal benefit to smoking. What I'm arguing is that oil company executives shouldn't be lying either. We should acknowledge the externalities and work to address them, and also like be constructive in that. But energy provides a societal benefit in a way that cigarettes did not.
Sure. I'll agree with that. But like, how do you get them to stop lying, Neal?
Here's where I'll
okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they should sue until they don't lie. Fine, I'm good with that.
No one will, claim that solving climate change is not complicated, right? It is. And the closer we get to net zero, the harder those last percentage points of reduction are going to be. There's a lot of hard technical challenges that we haven't figured out yet. And if we get to the point where we're trying to figure out, well, what the hell do we do about Alaska? Like those edge cases, we're going to be so far beyond the progress that we've made to date that I'm going to be very happy that that's still the challenges that we've got left on the table.
I think you missed my point if you think Alaska is an edge case. I think Alaska is one of every place is an edge case. Every single geography is a little different.
Sure, I don't disagree. But my work is to create the incentive structure for every actor in our energy system to be participating in good faith on behalf of the interests of America and American consumers, right? And that's why regular people's participation is important. We need to be exposing big corporations' decision making to scrutiny and transparency. We need to be making clear, what our interests are as a country, both in national security and our economic interests in terms of growth and prosperity and cost of living. And we need to be expecting the people in power to be advancing those interests. And that's what my team does. And that's what I think more people should get involved in doing.
Yeah. All right. How do people get involved?
A lot of different ways. There's different local environmental orgs people can join. One that I'm excited about. So in my intro, we mentioned that I am one of the co-founders of a veterans group called Common Defense, and Common Defense has a program called Vets Power America, which is building a workforce development pipeline for transitioning troops getting out and helping them find jobs in the clean energy sector. There's actually a lot of great transferability of skills there. And secondly, working together in local communities to demystify these projects and, debunk myths that people may have about, the wind farm is going to kill all the birds or whatever, right? Like it's bad for the whales. Having that evidence-based conversation in those siting processes, where we have veterans talking about why these are good for our national security, why they're good for veterans, why they're good for the local community that they're going to be in, and that they'll create jobs and prosperity and bring more energy online into our grid that reduces
I'm
our
guessing
cost
you've
of
heard
living.
of Project Vanguard then?
Yeah, they're
That
great.
sounds
They're
like a
great.
very
Close partner as well. Project Vanguard, for those who may not be familiar, is organizing the veterans who work in the clean energy industry. So are already in those jobs. Vets Power America is helping them get those jobs.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think this is the part that I'm sure we're going to agree on. Like I advocate for this all day, every day. It's just like the energy security in America got worse over the last year because we choked off the fastest growing, cheapest forms of electricity. I agree, actually, with maybe you can tell me what you think, but I agree with the energy dominance agenda. I think as an objective, fantastic. Like, sign me up.
Yep.
But the actual policies the administration is pursuing don't actually work towards the objective that they stated. So it's a little ironic. Again, it's like it's just political. They're trying to convince people, but it's also I'm sure there's lobbying behind the scenes, and it doesn't hurt that Chris Wright is a gas executive and basically just wants to get gas executives bigger paychecks. But what do you think of the energy dominance objective? The agenda, sorry.
Yeah, well, I strongly believe that we need as much energy as we can get, that, we should make sure that we bring that energy online in a responsible, well-planned way. So one of the things that Texas does really well is they future-proof their grid expansions to build that transmission. They identify zones of opportunity where, I'm sure you know this way better than I do, but they're making it easy for new projects to come online. Not every state does that, right? And we need to, encourage local governments to make it easy to bring more energy online and to do it in a way that is sensitive to the needs of the local communities that are going to be nearby. Totally on board with that, right? My family lives my parents live in Rhode Island, right by Quonset, which is a big offshore wind hub. They have the first big offshore wind project in America is being constructed right off my parents' hometown. It was 95% complete, and the administration screeched the brakes, said you need to stop construction because they cited national security reasons. This is a company from Denmark was building this, right? Or I don't know, we're scared of the Vikings are gonna come raid Rhode Island, because we let them build a wind turbine off of Newport. Yeah. So that's like energy dominance agenda is those kinds of projects getting built, not getting roadblocks thrown in their face.
Yep. Now let's talk about why do you care about this stuff so much, Alex? How? I mean, people have heard why I care. I had an experience with a wildfire when I was a kid. Neal has talked about his time in the Marine Corps and about how dependent he was on fossil fuels and for a couple of things that just where it's what the hell are we doing here? What drives you, Alex?
Yeah. Well, I have a 1.5-year-old baby daughter, and I just, bought this house and signed a 30-year mortgage. And both of those things have made me start thinking in different time scales. Nothing makes you start considering, what are my home values going to be when I pay off this 30-year mortgage? Is it still going to be insurable? Is there going to be increasing hurricanes 3 decades from now? You don't really think in those time scales when you're in your teens, in your 20s, and even your 30s until you start hitting those milestones. And I want a world that my little daughter and her siblings that come after her can grow up and have opportunity and not be living in an economy that's hobbled, by bad policies. I want her to breathe good air. I want her to drink good water. I want there to be jobs, and I want those jobs to be ethical. So, One more piece is when I was in the Marines, I served for 6 years, separated in 2013 as a sergeant. My job was working in U.S. embassies. And the first embassy I was assigned to was our U.S. embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I was there during the Arab Spring, which was a whole tumultuous period of protest and even revolution in some cases, driven by the inability of those countries in the region to meet the fundamental needs of a large, booming, young population. There weren't jobs, there weren't opportunities, there was a great deal of government oppression, and these are countries that are powered by oil wealth. And when I was working in that embassy, we had Saudi Aramco is the sort of American Saudi partner oil company that extracts oil in Saudi Arabia. We saw the big oil company executives there all the time. It was like our U.S. embassy was an outpost of the oil industry. We were a consulate for Saudi Aramco at times, and it really opened my eyes to the way that oil has driven our foreign policy in a lot of ways. I think it's cliche sometimes to say, we invaded Iraq for the oil. There's not zero truth to that. Like the importance of some of these countries that we have invested the blood of so many of our brothers and sisters and countless trillions of dollars.
Truth to Sorry, Alex, there's a lot more than 0%.
There's a lot more. I'm trying to be generous here, right? Like the reason why we give a damn about Iraq, Iran, all these countries in the Middle East, Qatar, it's oil.
It's oil. Like we would not care at all. We wouldn't be there. We wouldn't give a shit about that region if it wasn't for the oil. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Totally. I'm glad you're. I think that's the common sense reaction that most people have. Like everybody kind of knows this, and we spent 2 decades, in the Middle East with, I don't know off the top of my head all the consequences and the amount of families that were devastated by that. And we served as we were asked, and we did our best in a bad situation at a lot of times. But I don't want my daughter, if she God forbid joins the Marine Corps, to get deployed to the Middle East for another another war, because security around the production and the extraction of oil keeps us stuck in this endless quagmire of violence.
So to tie it back a little bit there, like if we had transitioned a little bit earlier, how many lives of American servicemen get saved there? I don't, that's an unquantifiable sort of thing, but it's not zero.
No, and it's a great point. I think if we had been smarter and seen and acknowledged the externalities and acknowledged the dependence on this very volatile place, and I only say dependence. That's actually inaccurate. It's just, as I said before, it's a global market, and the reason we care about that region is because if oil stops flowing, it impacts the rest of the global market. We get most of our oil from Canada, but it's part of a global market. So anyway, I like to bring this back to the sort of most contentious point of our conversation. It's not that I don't acknowledge all of that. I am, I guess, maybe a Marine first, and I think about our security first. And what I think about is I call those guys the good guys, Chevron, BP, blah, 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 because if World War III happens, we're going to need the source of energy that is available. And the 85% of the world's oil that is controlled by Russia, Venezuela, China, etc., those national oil companies, that is not going to be available to us. And so I start with energy as our prosperity and our security, and it comes down to that security piece for me. It doesn't mean, I think I've learned a bit here about like, should those fuckers be lying? No. You're holding them to account. I appreciate that. I think I'd be much happier if those, what I call the good guys in the national security sense, Chevron, Exxon, et cetera, would just be honest and help us all work towards, more energy that is sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to maybe switch gears here a little bit, Alex, and talk to your time as an embassy Marine. So not a lot of Americans, I think, fully appreciate that's a specialty job of the U.S. Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the Marines have this kind of role of being, part of the presidential detail. You see them standing outside the office there. They're also like the president's band, because whatever. They fly around the president in the helicopter. But like one of the things,
whatever. Because whatever.
I don't know, because like John Philip Sousa was like a whole thing, But sorry, I had a friend that was I actually have a friend that was a Marine pilot that was part of that band. Anyways, long story short, but the other thing that Marines do is they do embassy protection everywhere in the world that there are embassies, friendly countries like Denmark, and hostile countries like Libya, China, potentially, like there are Marines standing the post. And their job is to be the layer in between the soft targets like Alexander, like the ambassador that was killed in Libya,
Ambassador
for example.
Stevens. Yeah,
Ambassador Stevens. Sorry, I got confused with Alexander Stevens, who's a very different person. Sorry about that, Ambassador Stevens, in your memory. But Ambassador Stevens, in Libya, their job is to be the layer between a potentially hostile public and the American government that's inside, that's representing the American interests out in the world there. And so, like, that's got to be an interesting layer. Like, how much training did you get for that, to be like the guy that's between American interests behind you and like Saudi Arabia in front of you? Let's remember at that time, like what years were you there?
I was in Saudi Arabia from 2010 to 2011, Honduras from 11 to 12, and Berlin, Germany from 12 to 13.
Okay, so we know in those years, like in Saudi Arabia, for example, this is post 9/11. We are familiar with like the Saudi populace has hosted the people that brought down the Twin Towers, for example.
I was there when Bin Laden got killed. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have the
I was on duty
people
that
like you're trying to protect from, like, versus the people you're trying to protect, like, directly behind you. You are that layer.
Mm-hmm.
In Honduras, it's a little bit of a different story, but like it's a developing nation that's got a lot of like crime. You're having to deal with that, and then I'm hoping Berlin was a little bit more civil. But like what training did you have to go through for all of that?
Yeah. Thank you for asking. There's the training component, and there's also the vetting and screening component. So a lot of the entry to that role involved psychological analysis, obviously a top secret security clearance, and all the vetting that goes into that. We had, very rigorous peer review, in the same way that some of the like Ranger School, I believe, also does this. Some of the Special Forces selection also does this. You have to rank everyone in your squad and say whether you'd serve with them. And you ultimately face a board of, they've got 3-letter agency people, the State Department people, the Marine commanders who look at all your test scores and your evals from your peers and all of the things in your background that they checked out. So it's an important role. And, for a reason, there were some scandals back in the 70s where the Russians were able to flip one of the embassy guards who was stationed in Moscow. And he was essentially honeypotted by a Russian officer, and gave up the identities of a bunch of the undercover folks at Moscow station. So that's partly why they rotate us so often. So there's no time to flip anybody. But yeah, it was a very extensive training down in Quantico, Virginia. Host of the Pete Hegseth patent speech that we just saw.
More on that later.
And I guess you learn a lot of like how to de-escalate situations and provide that protection, and use the skills that you're taught as a Marine for combat environment, in an environment that is a lot more fragile and sensitive, where if you do something wrong, you could cause a massive diplomatic incident and you could really harm U.S. foreign policy interests. So,
so where I'm going with this is I want to talk about like what your thoughts are about deployment of National Guard broadly, and specifically the U.S. Marine Corps into American cities right now. It doesn't seem like they're sending embassy Marines or necessarily just MPs that have like some experience in law enforcement. It sounds like they're sending kind of, just your average grunt. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
Can I add a little context?
Sure.
Just before you answer that question, Alex, I was a pilot and also a forward air controller, and people ask me this all the time, like, what do you think? And I'm like, all I can tell you is that I received zero training on how to do crowd control or riot control I can tell you all about, collateral damage of civilians against military targets and et cetera, but I received exactly zero training. Of all the training I got, which was years and years and years worth, I got zero on what I would or should do in America. So I'm hoping what you're going to tell me is that at least as an embassy Marine, you got more than zero.
Yeah. It's incredibly important that you do not use more force than necessary, that you understand a clear escalation of tactics, that you keep things de-escalated. As Marines in combat, you're trained to escalate. You're trained to achieve dominance in the battle space, right? Because that's how you win a firefight. That's how you control an area. In a law enforcement context, that is the opposite of what you want to do. The more you escalate, the more the crowd or the individual you're engaging with will escalate in response, and you can create a very dangerous situation. We also are not trained in the American law, in people's constitutional rights, all I know is what I've seen on Law and Order, right? Like I could probably rattle off an approximation of someone's Miranda rights, but there's been this conflation of, we're not doing law enforcement, we're doing, temporary detention, but it makes no difference to the American citizen in zip ties.
So did you get trained to de-escalate then? Or are you saying you got trained to escalate as a Marine?
We got trained in basic to escalate. We got trained in, our ordinary Marine duties to escalate. In embassy context, you get trained to de-escalate, to establish control and to keep things calm and to reduce, use the minimum force necessary to control the situation. And that is not standard training for most Marines.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, so as a side note, also, boot camp was easy, right? It was totally like Exef told us yesterday that it was.
Oh yeah, sauce. Everybody's fat. They're having a great time.
Nothing but a kegger going on in boot camp.
That's right. Got my stress cards. I'm eating ice cream.
How do you feel about Marines? Being deployed to Los Angeles, man.
Well, not only am I against it, I've been organizing ever since to try to, speak out and to stop this encroachment on our constitutional rights that we sort of uphold. I organized a letter here in Florida when they deployed 200 active duty Marines to the so-called Alligator Alcatraz detention. I'd call it concentration camp. In the Everglades. By the way, most of the people who were held there have disappeared. We have no idea where they are. Their lawyers, their families, no idea. Incredible human rights abuses. And they were implicating U.S. Marines. They were sending them there. And, unlike somebody who works in, say, ICE or Border Patrol, right? A Marine can't just quit. You can't just be like, this isn't what I signed up for. I'm going to go get a different job, right? Like you go to the brig if you go UA, if you go AWOL, right? So, we were sending these 200 young Marines into a incredibly ethically wrong situation, asking them to do something they had no training for. And I thought that was really, really wrong. So I started an open letter with a few buddies of mine here in Orlando, Florida. We ultimately had more than 600 veterans in Florida sign on that letter and, put their names and their hometowns and like be loud and proud and speaking out that this is not an appropriate use for our military. And we ultimately, right after that letter snowballed, we got some local media coverage. A couple of members of Congress reshared it on their social media. Within a matter of days, after being there a month, those 200 Marines have been withdrawn and sent back to their base in North Carolina.
There was dishonor placed upon what otherwise is honorable service, not of their doing. So the only way that you kind of return that honor is by ending the abuse. And so, no, good for you, Alex. I'm glad that you stood up, and I think, frankly, that's the only way that these things stop. It frustrates me a lot of times when there's been a lot of reporting coming out here recently about nihilism or kind of doomerism is kind of the meme sort of way that they talk about it, but specifically of younger generations looking to the future. And because they see that our government is pretty fucking broken, our climate is not going the right direction. There's a lot of things that are not going right, and they kind of give up. And I have like zero patience for that. And it's because, to me, I go back to my martial, background. No one soldier or Marine in this case wins a war. But no war is won without a whole bunch of people signing on the dotted line and getting into the fight. And making individual decisions in order to do what they can in their local area, and collective decisions as part of a larger organization. And so, I'd commend you on standing up for what you believe in, and the honor of the U.S. Marine Corps for not being involved in what is patently and was designed and explicitly advertised as abuses, like human rights abuses. Like, that was the objective of Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah, let me add, I think, also kudos. I think I'm struggling with, I just heard it in how you described it too. We need to be very clear about why it's wrong. I think people don't understand why it's wrong, why Marines shouldn't be on U.S. city streets or at Alligator Alcatraz or used in a domestic law enforcement scenario at all. I can articulate it. I've done it before on this podcast. I just think it's important for folks like the three of us to be able to articulate that very clearly. Because people I talk to are like, well, I mean, they're available. Why not? What's the big deal? Like, why is it a problem? So I just encourage you to be very clear about why it's a problem. And I'm sure your letter was, I'm just, in your description now, it was just like a statement of fact that it's wrong, but not the backup. So,
yeah.
I mean, so Alex, maybe, make it really clear. Like, why is it wrong that the U.S. military shouldn't be used in domestic law enforcement?
Well, I think at a basic level, the purpose of the military is to fight America's enemies. And if you deploy the military against Americans, pretty soon, we're going to start having a situation where the American people are the enemy. And we see in the way things played out in Los Angeles, you had people protesting using their First Amendment constitutional rights against policies that the U.S. government was doing. And, whether you agree with those policies or not, right? I think we can all agree that people have a constitutional right to protest what they disagree with. And we saw troops deployed against them. We saw troops, putting American, and in fact, there was a Marine veteran who was on his way to a VA appointment who ended up in zip ties because Marines arrested him. And that's the situation that is incredibly dangerous. It is not something that Marines or National Guard, for that matter, are trained to handle. So you have a risk of escalation. Just take somebody thinking they heard, a car backfire, and now was that a gunshot? And now, you're falling back on your training. And we could end up with a Kent State style massacre. We could end up, with something really, really bad. And, you're going to see young, lieutenants and captains, young sergeants and corporals, put in, in a situation they've never been trained for, and with incredibly high stakes, and it's not their mission. If we need law enforcement, send law enforcement, right? They are the ones whose job it is to handle civil unrest, if you will, to enforce the law.
Yeah. I just want to juxtapose also the thing that came out of that speech in Quantico yesterday was the Department of War part of it. And I'll just build on your point about Marines. The military is meant to fight our enemies. And according to this administration, they're for war fighting. So they just now been very clear that the military is not for defense, it's for war. Then, okay, by that logic, then why the F are they on U.S. city streets?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, to that point, actually, the speech that came after Hegsbreth's, speech talking about like how we're the Department of War and they're going to go kill things and break people or break things, kill people and break things, was Trump's speech. And Trump very explicitly, and this is something people can see there, the president of the United States says the U.S. military should be used to fight the enemy within. He described, our population in major American cities as war zones themselves, and that one of the best ways that we can train the military for fighting in foreign wars is by fighting the enemy within. And that is fucking straight up fascist. I think he should be like impeached. Like I think that there is like he should be removed for office either through the impeachment process, because like that is a gross abuse of his duty, or if he is just a senile old man, then he needs the 25th Amendment. He needs to jerk him out, and now we need to have a president advance. One of the two needs to be happening, in my opinion, because he has explicitly described the American people as the enemy, and he has a duty to serve the people he is calling the enemy. So I think let's go ahead and kind of wrap it up there. Sorry to end it on such a cheery little note, but this is typically the part of the program where Neal and I talk about our goods, bads, and others. Alex, if you're not familiar, goods, bads, and others is something that we do post-flight to talk about what went well, what's not going so well, and then what's something that's happening that we need to kind of keep our eye on, which is the others there. Neal, you want to get started?
Yeah, my good this week is Lisa Cook. She's the Federal Reserve Board governor who Trump is trying to fire. It's a good because the Supreme Court actually sided against the administration, which is not something they've done a lot of. They've done it a couple of times. And I've said before that I think this is sort of the administration is doing all sorts of things to push boundaries, to break laws, and daring people to call them on it. And for the most part, there's been very little pushback from Congress, very little pushback from the court, but in this case, they did. So we'll take the win. My bad this week is my to-do list is fucking too long. I'm just going to leave it at that. And then my other is the government shutdown. We just went through, we went through several of these, many years ago before the pandemic. I'm happy that fucking Democrats are standing up. Like the outcome is very uncertain. If they play their cards right, they might actually get some momentum out of it. I'm skeptical because they've been so inept to this point. But I'm gonna watch it because, maybe they'll start some positive momentum.
It'd be nice if they had a little backbone and kept it for standing up for the little guy here. Speaking of the little guy, for me, my good is I get to go see my family starting tomorrow. We're going to a wedding. It's going to be kind of an extended family reunion. I'm really looking forward to seeing a lot of people there that I haven't seen in a while. And one of my favorite people is getting married in the family. Like he's always been my cousin Ted Challenger. He's always been looking out for me. Very much give you the shirt off your back sort of guy. So I'm just happy he found somebody to spend some time with. The little guy that I'm talking about there is the TSA agent and their air traffic controllers that aren't going to be getting paid while I fly up there. So want to, just give a thank, that's a pretty thankless job. I have family members that are also air traffic controllers. And I just really appreciate, when I say thank you for your service, it doesn't just apply to, the military. these people make my life better, and I appreciate their work. For the bad, it's Trump's speech. Like, I think that is just, it blows me away that it's like we're at this point now where like this is just like assumed as his normal behavior. I don't know what the fuck has happened in my country. I don't know why everybody is not screaming that this guy should be out of the office. Like in a normal and functioning democracy, like he would have been like arrested today. Like that is like, it is, he is calling for making the American people the enemy. I just don't know what else to say. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're a Trump supporter, am I your enemy? What Americans are your enemy? And I would challenge you if you can say an American is your enemy, you yourself are not an American, right? Like you don't understand what it means to be an American, right? You don't understand what it means about the rule of law. You don't actually give a fuck about the Constitution. And so it's infuriating to me that guy is not being held to account in so many ways. So there's that. And then my other is the earlier part of that speech, old Keg's breath out there, trying to, it was really funny to watch all the reactions. Like you could tell that the military bullshit meter is really alive and well as all these generals are just kind of like, okay, dude.
Yeah. I think he was expecting some laugh lines, and then they didn't laugh.
Some of them, his releases later from like his media apparatus were like they actually added applause lines to it.
Oh my god!
They added an applause track to it because like the military was just like sitting there stone. And I would like to commend the General and Flag Officer Corps associated with that, like to know that this was a speech that was meant to be political and to show that the military in support. And you did what you were supposed to do. Shut the fuck up. Like and you had to show up. He's your boss. You got to do this. Like there's that, but you are not required to clap. And you didn't. And I appreciate that for the General and Flag Officer Corps. So that was good. It reminded me of a speech of like what a 22-year-old sergeant might give to a bunch of 19-year-old corporals. That doesn't really understand like what the modern military is all about, actually. And is really, valuing like a good shave over a competent operator. But whatever, dude, like fucking, if you want to make a fool of yourself, there's that. The question I have though is, and why this is an other for me is like, what do we do now? What does the General and Flag Officer Corps do moving forward? We already have had one public retirement. It's the Global Strike Command General, who, by the way, like the U.S. military, their most recent action was from Global Strike Command in the United States Air Force putting bombs deep into a bunker in Iran. If you want to talk about how the U.S. military is not lethal, that is like the most lethal capacity of this military, and you just lost the guy that ran that operation. So, like, what are we? What I don't know is coming out of this is like the military will get weaker for this. Like, we're not going to get stronger. We're actually losing the talent, and we already had one lost the other day. But what does that leave us with? Like, are we left with a bunch of cronies of his that are kind of showing up? Probably 20% of that officer corps at least knew that even if they weren't supposed to clap, that they were probably supportive of what he was doing. Does that go to 30, 40, 50%? Like, what does this do to kind of a hollowing out of the capacity of the military to remain an apolitical institution? And I'm not sure about that. So that's why it's my other.
Should I go?
Yeah, sure, man. You got a few goods, bads, and others?
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate the chance. For my good, there is an Army and Marine Corps vet in Maine who's running for U.S. Senate against Susan Collins, a guy named Graham Plattner. And honestly, like, I find him so inspiring. Like, I've never felt more like represented, quote unquote, by a politician. Like, the guy's not a politician. He's an oyster farmer in a tiny little town of less than 1,000 people. And I just feel like he really speaks my language. He's like the real deal, and it's gotten me really fired up that somebody like him could run for office and and be successful. And I want to see more veterans who, have a good head on their shoulders and, are fighting for the middle class and working families and, understand that experience to run for office. And that gives me hope, right? To your point about doomerism, we got to remember that there is hope and good things are happening and we are making progress. And, one of my mantras is incremental progress is still progress. For bad, I am really concerned about what's happening to the VA right now, which is exacerbated by the government shutdown, but was already in really bad shape. The current administration was trying to cut 80,000 workers from the VA, which, contrary to their claims, included direct healthcare providers. My own local VA, which is right down the street, already has a chronic shortage of certain specialties, including mental health care and, in our case, radiology. Those cuts, they've already cut 30,000. They're trying to cut more. They're trying to privatize more of our healthcare, so that people can get rich off of veterans injuries. And I just think the whole thing is an absolute disaster. And then my other, there's a guy who's a member of Common Defense who was in Chicago, part of the protests at an ICE detention facility, and 20-year retiree, old. I think he's in his 70s, got a big old white beard, was just standing there being peaceful, and the big ICE chud, tactical guys, they grabbed him, they threw him to the ground, they arrested him, they held him overnight, and we got him successfully released. And so he is, they're claiming he assaulted federal law enforcement, but it's all on video. Like, the guy's, he's a lamb, he's a mouse, he's not. He was just standing there. So I'm keeping my eye on that, and I think it goes to show just like how empowered the worst elements in some of these agencies feel right now, that there's no accountability. And so that's why I'm so focused on accountability and, showing that they're, what goes around comes around. If you violate people's rights, if you do something bad, like, it may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but eventually it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah, here. Accountability is part of being a man, and if you don't want to face the music, then maybe you shouldn't be, joining the orchestra. All right, folks, that's all the time we've got today for our episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and for being part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought-provoking, make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, if you're feeling generous, share it on social media or send it to someone who would appreciate it. I know I would. Thanks again to Alexander McCoy for joining us today. Really enjoyed the conversation, Alex. Hardpoints is produced by Jordan Garuso and brought to you by the Valor Media Network. We'll see you all soon.